Does the law make it possible for some individuals to own slaves? Slavery was abolished, but is there a loophole in the system that enables certain individuals to still make use of slavery up to this day? In today's society, where it's very common to get only a fraction of what you worked for, most people would tell you that slavery is still alive and kicking. What if they really meant that? Not as a figurative statement, but as in literally. A loophole in the system, a glitch in the matrix that allows certain individuals powers over your rights and your freedom. That means you are no longer free and independent, but an owned property by this specific select few. Your life wouldn't be the same, would it? If you don't believe me, just take a moment and listen to this man as he explains history in details, the histories that we may not have been told in school. And remember, this video is for educational purposes only and nothing else.
More history? Oh, I'm glad you asked. I mean, since we're on the subject of Hillary Rodham Clinton, we might as well talk about the time that she kept slaves. Back in the 1980s, her and Bill Clinton had some household tasks that needed doing. So they got prison labor, like prison laborers that they had contracted to do it. And I mean contracted, they didn't contract with the prisoners, they contracted with the prison who controls their labor. And when people say that slavery was never abolished in the United States, that's what they're talking about. When you look at the 14th Amendment, it says slavery is abolished, slavery is illegal in all cases except when it's punishment for a crime. And when you know about that loophole, you begin to understand that pretty much every stereotype about black or brown people being criminal is profitable. So when you know that, I really hope you start to question any of those beliefs that you hold, because I promise you it was something taught to you during the 70s, 80s, or 90s that was meant to keep this slave labor system going. Because those prisons and the people who own them, the private companies who own them, the jails, you know, who own people's labor, they own their freedom. And they can force them to do whatever they want through incredibly cruel and unusual punitive means that frankly no one cares about, because those people have been criminalized. For non-violent drug offenses, like during the war on drugs, for like things like marijuana possession and distribution, things that are legal across a lot of the United States now. And the reason I bring up this like essential part of history is because it's essentially the modern extension of what has been 500 years of behavior from white colonial settlers. And those are all really big words, don't yet scroll away. In Europe, what happened about 500 years ago, 1500s, is these European countries had been fighting for 500 years for territory. At this point, they had started to form sort of national identities along these really like arbitrary borders that their rulers had fought to take up, right? And in this like 500 years of fighting, from about 1000 to 1500 AC Common Era CE, is them basically fighting each other into poverty and resource deprivation. At the same time, they also go on the Crusades, and they realize there's a bunch of other resources abroad that they can use their newfound skill at bashing each other's heads in to go and bash other people's heads in and take their nice stuff. And so the New World Order is established. And we've been playing that out for the last 5 centuries, from about 1500 till now, since the Columbian Exchange. Since Christopher Columbus got to the Americas and discovered that there were already people there. Yeah, so we killed a bunch of the people that we discovered there with smallpox and also with direct warfare and enslavement, at the same time as we enslaved a bunch of people from the African continent and then shipped them across the ocean to our colonies. And present day problems are just the natural extension of destroying people's societies over 500 years, right? Like, what we're seeing today is just the end results of setting up a world based on the people from Europe think they're better because they're better at killing and are all somewhat similar looking. And if you want to know history, you can, at least for the last 500 years, you can always start with, what does colonialism have to do with it? Because what we're seeing today is the modern version of these things. Like, when you see politicians investing in stocks, that's how they reap the rewards of international colonialism. Whereas back in like the European days of empire and royalty, it was about signing contract charters where these this ruling class of aristocrats would give permission to companies, just groups of men, to go to places and steal their resources. So that's where capitalism starts. It's, I want to capitalize on the vulnerability of people who haven't spent the last 500 years murdering each other in developing fires and advanced armor. Yeah, so that's a broad overview of history and slavery and exploitation. I hope that gives you some good context to get started on what's happening right now. Yeah, have a good one.
Some people may have kept slaves even after slavery was abolished because, let's be honest, it was a profitable business, allowing those individuals to amass millions of US dollars, and in today's money, it would even be billions, if not trillions. And that explains the reasons as to why the system might even allow them to continue doing so up to date. The portion of the 14th Amendment that we are referring to is found in Section 1, which states, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." This clause essentially abolishes slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States, except in the context of punishment for a crime. In other words, individuals cannot be held as slaves or subjected to involuntary servitude unless they have been duly convicted of a crime. If you have committed a crime, slavery can be one form of punishment for you, and apparently this also means that you're kind of deserving of it as an offender. This exception has been controversial and has been criticized for perpetuating a system of forced labor, particularly in the context of convict, leasing, and chain gangs, which were prevalent in the post-Civil War South. Under these systems, African Americans especially were often arrested on trumped-up charges or minor offenses and then forced to work under brutal conditions as a form of punishment. This practice effectively exploited the loophole in the 14th Amendment's language, allowing for continuation of forced labor under the guise of criminal justice. It doesn't really mention whether this has been stopped and the people that have practiced it have been held accountable for this, but it just talks about the ongoing debates concerning this exploitation of the loophole. So let's look at how some individuals were able to exploit the loophole in the 14th Amendment's exception clause by manipulating the criminal justice system. The first one is selective enforcement of laws. Law enforcement and judicial authorities selectively enforce laws against certain groups, especially African Americans, through discriminatory practices, such as racial profiling, harsh sentencing, and biased jury selection. This resulted in disproportionate representation of minorities in the criminal justice system, providing a larger pool of potential forced labor. I might not mention African Americans or black people in the following points, but just know that the following also apply to them. We also have unfair legal proceedings. In many cases, individuals were convicted of minor or trumped-up charges in unfair legal proceedings, often without adequate legal representations or due process protections. And please note, I might use the past tense in reference to this amendment, but these things are still ongoing. Some were falsely accused or convicted based on racial biases, leading to unjust imprisonment and exploitation. We've heard all these things before, and since the justice system wasn't created for certain marginalized groups, we might as well just say that we shouldn't be surprised. We also have convict leasing, After being convicted of a crime, individuals were sometimes leased out to private companies or individuals to work as laborers, often under brutal and exploitative conditions. This practice, known as convict leasing, was prevalent in the post-Civil War South and allowed businesses to profit from cheap convict labor while avoiding the cost of maintaining prisons. Chain gangs. In addition to convict leasing, some states involved chain gangs, where groups of convicts were forced to perform hard labor such as road construction or agricultural work while shackled together in chains. This practice was dehumanizing and often subjected prisoners to dangerous working conditions and physical abuse. A loophole in the 14th Amendment's exception clause provided insufficient legal protections for individuals subjected to forced labor as punishment for a crime. In many cases, there were few safeguards against exploitation, and the rights of prisoners were routinely violated without meaningful recourse or accountability. Like we said, slavery was a profitable business, and some people have failed to let go of it because it was profitable, and has continued to make them millions even up to date. Now leave your thoughts in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video. Consider liking and subscribing.